So, thank you guys for being on our podcast. So, today's topic is about the purpose of college education. And first, let's do a quick round of introductions and then we can get to the topic. Praveen, you want to start?
Yeah, sounds good. Firstly, it's an immense pleasure being here. Thank you for inviting us. So my name is Praveen, Praveen Bandla. I'm a second year at UCLA. I'm majoring in mathematics economics with a specialization in computation.
Hey guys, my name is Talib Attarwala. I am studying chemical engineering and I'm from Mumbai, India.
My name's Ariman Khandelwal. I'm a second year stats and econ double major at UCLA with a concentration in value investing.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So for today's podcast, we put the topic of what is the purpose of college education for you guys.
Okay, I'll take it away. So when I walked into college, I quickly knew that, or came to an understanding rather, that the purpose for me was not as much the education or the sole and the primary purpose wasn't necessarily education or professional development. It was more personal development. I found that the university that we're in is a very unique environment in that it gives us an opportunity to interact with incredibly brilliant minds from all walks of life, all backgrounds. People, aspiring to be actors, people aspiring to be politicians, aspiring to be businessmen, aspiring to be engineers. It's just all kinds of backgrounds, and I think that's a certain exposure that was immensely invaluable to me. And on top of that, I think universities just provide and harbor an environment of being very opportunistic, and it gives you an environment where you can explore different skill sets, build different skill sets, gain new experiences that remain close to you lifelong. And I think that's what I was really chasing for. So in summary, it's just exposure to different people and exposure to different opportunities and taking on everything I can.
For the most part, I agree with Praveen as well in that definitely see the person development side of a university. But for me, it was more of a combination, amalgamation of personal and professional development. In that, I definitely tended towards the togetherness factor of university. In that you're staying in the dorms with like-minded people, with co-evals, with people of your own age and someone who you can relate to, basically. And that's something that's very unique to a university environment, I feel like. And after you graduate from university, you tend to not find that in many aspects of life. So that's for me, that was one of the biggest purposes of university. But I think a large part for personally was also the professional side of it, like picking a major, figuring out what you want to do, and then really specializing and honing in on the skills that you want to build up that can help you move forward with your goals and aspirations. And I think that's something that is unique to a university environment, especially in the United States, which allows such a diverse range of majors. As Praveen said, you can major in theater or you can major in math, and that's not something that you find in a lot of places. Especially the switching aspect of majors is something very unique to the US, and that's something that I really value in the university experience as well.
So the way I see it is when I came to college, I had no clue what I wanted to do. Like literally, I had no idea. I came in as a chemical engineer, um, thinking that I like chemistry and I like engineering. So like the road to go down is chemical engineering, but that didn't seem to be the right choice. Um, then, so basically, what happened in my first year was that I switched around into many different areas. So I first went into econ, then I looked into math, then I looked into material science. Like, I just had so much flexibility, and that's what I really appreciate about college. You can learn about anything, and hone yourself and like really refine yourself in that field and become really good at one thing. And I really like that about college. So, college for me is more like figuring out who I am, challenging into what I can become. Challenge is like a good word to use over here because, you know, I can get an education anywhere really. I mean, today with the internet, there is immense amount of information out there. So, what is the point of college? One might think, right? But it's not so much about the sorry about the information, but more about the challenge. um I mean, I can sit in my bedroom and learn about physics, and I can learn a fair deal about it. But to become really good at physics, I need to challenge myself, and the way I can do it is by competing with people that have a deeper knowledge than me, and learning from them. So, college is about challenge for me and seeing what I'm made of, really.
Wow, that's a very interesting perspective. And so I am a millennial, and you guys are Gen Z, I would assume, right? And when I went to college, like I definitely was, I would say more around, getting into a job so that I could feed myself. So, but it's very interesting to hear you guys. It's college degree is just beyond profession, and it's discovering who you are and challenging yourself and learning about yourself. So in terms of like more on the professional side, right? How do you see the purpose of the college degree in terms of your professional development, and how it prepares you for your future career goals?
Yeah, I definitely think though that over time things have changed. As Talib pointed out in his great response, I must say that um, we've kind of come to a point with the prevalence of the internet where we don't necessarily need to be at a 4 year to have a 4 year degree in something to claim to know a great deal about it. Um, and I think the emergence of non-traditional forms of education for the purposement of professional development is definitely on the rise. And I think if it were the case of professional development, there is no need to shell out the money that people do for college in a traditional sense. I think there are a lot of alternatives. For example, there's the Lambda School, which is now, I think it came out in 2010 or something. I might be mistaken, but essentially the purpose is they bring people in and say, look, you don't have to pay a penny. Everything's online. We will teach you how to be a coder from ground up for the purpose of your job. Now, you only pay us when you land your job, when you land your first job that pays you over $50,000 or $60,000. After which it's a commission of income for the first 5 years with the cutoff. And I think there are ventures like these that are on the rise that really question the purpose of college being a fundamental source of professional development. And I think the other side of your professional development, recruiters, corporations, different positions, have started to understand that, right? It's no longer a requirement for you to be a certain major to be specializing in a certain field. There are people killing it on Wall Street having majored in physics. There are people who are changing the tech game having majored in math. And I think there's such a flow and variance in your major in attaining your respective industry. And I think that that's a result of the predominance of the internet into people teaching people of different things that they may need for their respective industry. So I think, like, building on a personal anecdote, I think when I was looking for some, career advice, or like what I should be thinking about before pursuing a certain industry, from a lot of my seniors who were also economics majors, and they simply told me that my college degree factually wasn't going to give me anything I needed for my job, and that if I wanted to recruit for finance, I would have to read everything myself, and then send me a 500-page document or 500-page guide from something else. And yeah, I think a lot of things are very similar to that. I think the CS stream is another good example. So I think the second class that you can take as a CS or non-CS major at UCLA, it's
Is
called
that computer
CS32.
science?
Yes, computer science. It's called CS32, and I think at there is a stat somewhere that the professor himself mentioned, saying that after this college you will have had 92% of the knowledge you need to be a full-time developer. So and this is just within 2 classes. So it really questions the purpose of having a full degree for your professional development. I think there are other factors of college, such as what you do outside just your academics, that contribute to your professional development, your application, your profile, which has now become a lot more attractive and lucrative than is having a 3.8 GPA.
I definitely agree with Praveen as well on that point. He made quite an excellent point there that in that recently we've started questioning the usefulness of getting a four-year degree. I also, but for me, the biggest thing about university is again coming back to that aspect of an amalgamation of the professional and personal development. I find that university provides a great environment to not only learn the theoretical skills that are needed for the industry that you want to get into. For example, like I want to get into investment banking after I graduate. So the econ and math side of my degree would definitely help in the theoretical knowledge. But a university also brings about individuals that are like-minded to you, for like people who want to be investment bankers. All of us are meeting in one place, and all of us are striving towards that same goal. And I find that sense of purpose is kind of wouldn't exist as it does right now if it wasn't for an in-person university. Like for example, at UCLA we have like tons of clubs like Bruin Asset Management, Bruin Consulting, Infinite Finance. All of these plethora of clubs really give a hub and environment where people who have the same goals and same aspirations as you can meet and discuss efficient ways of reaching where you collectively want to be, and playing into that role. There's the recruiter side of it, internships, all of this. The university environment really, as Talib said, it challenges the rigor and the pushes your not only intellectual limit but also but the limit to which you can develop yourself personally. So, like for example, interpersonal skills, communication skills, collaboration skills. All of these are really polished in a university setting, which I think would sort of be lost if it wasn't for a four-year degree that I would be working towards. And so I find a great amount of value in that university environment, and yeah, that's my 2 cents at this point.
Interesting.
For me, college itself doesn't really prepare you for a job. I think it's the community around the college that actually prepares you for what's next after college. As Ariman said, there are clubs that like help you in your professional endeavors, and that is probably the only thing in college that like prepares you for a job. Because so there is a problem of transferability of skills. Now I'll use my brother as an example. He studied econ at Emory University, and today he is working a job that basically uses no skills from the econ major. So I mean, you like start thinking about like is like when do these skills really kick in, or do they even really kick in? So the view I hold is that college is not made for a job. College is made to give you an education and give you the knowledge. And it just so happens that you can be good at a job if you get a college education. I don't think it should be that you should get a college education to get a job. It should be like a byproduct that you can get a job out of it. Um, so I mean the way I see it is, I mean, sure, I want a job, but first I want to do is get really good at something. And I know that like a job will come if I am good at something. So like college is all about getting good at something first. So that is how I approach it. But yeah, so there are clubs, and there are people that you meet. So you make like a nice network of people that you can connect with, and and that can help you get a job. So that is a good thing that I would say college. I mean that is the way college probably helps you to get a job.
Absolutely.
I think
I've heard. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna touch upon the transferability of skills aspect that Talib mentioned. I think especially you were mentioning all of us are Gen Z. Um, I felt like I should point out that I've, at least in my opinion and my experience, the transferability of skills aspect of university for me has been the best out of any time before. Like the we use the skills that we learn in college, I feel, in so many different ways, and especially the diversity of classes that we're afforded at a university setting, for me is really valuable outside of university as well. For example, like, I mean, I'm learning calculus and linear algebra right now, and I'm not sure if I'll be using them in like investment banking later. But I find that um, the intensity and rigor of college really helps me in building. I'm not sure um, if they are explicit, but the implicit skills needed to succeed as an investment banker who has such a rigorous job, 80 hours, 90 hours a week. So I think beyond just the explicit skills that you gain, I think the implicit transferability of skills is a huge advantage for for a college for me.
Very
Yeah,
interesting.
and yeah, if I may, I just wanted to build on that a bit by firstly saying that by making a distinction. So I think education is only a subset of the college experience as a whole, right? While I think college experience plays a big part of your professional development, I think the education part is far significant, and that distinction has never been as prevalent as it is now. I think what many people fail to realize about education is that your skill set isn't the knowledge you attain. For example, I'm never going to use discrete mathematics in my life again, and I'm confident of it, right? There's no given point of time where I'm going to be taking two truth statements and forming conjunctions or, um, yeah, out of it. And it just doesn't make sense if you think about it on a surface level. However, the skills that I do get by practicing and continuously doing, repeating such rigorous content is definitely developing certain skills. Um, I think something that might be a lot more easier to relate to is game theory, right? So I'm currently taking a class in game theory, and boy, do I love it. But anyways, that's besides the point. The concept of finding um, an equilibrium where two, say, players of a game find a point at which they don't want to deviate, in simplest terms, is not necessarily something that is very practical. In fact, the theory of game theory is very far off how it actually plays down, boils down, because of course, there's so many things we don't know. For example, how happy does something make someone, and what choices do people have? Are people even rational behaviors? There's so many things that one can question, but it's the practice of studying game theory that makes you an insanely good and adept strategic thinker. And I think that's a skill that's transferable anywhere, everywhere you go. And I think if you take almost the first derivative of if that makes sense, of your college education, of the classes you take. That's where you'll find your golden mine, and you'll find skills be incredibly transferable. I think something I've read, coming back to how I was talking about physics on physics majors in Wall Street, I think now the biggest recruiters of physics majors are investment banking companies, and I think that's just an amazing stat because it goes on. And if you look at it with a close lens, why? If you ask yourself, I think it's the certain skills that physics majors may have through pursuing whatever they were in college that makes them incredibly good at using those skills elsewhere. I think in a day and age as the one we live in today, attaining knowledge is easier than ever, right? All it takes is 4 hours. I've seen YouTube videos saying learn how to professionally code in 11 hours. That's it. And there are hundreds of these links. There are hundreds of pages that teach you how to give you various tutorials and things. And I think picking up the knowledge has never been easier, but having the skills behind making you excel um, and whatever area you wish to isn't as easy. And I think that's the underlying purpose of education that's often lost in a modern context.
Aryaman, you mentioned an interesting point about how university experience is, about finding like-minded people, about finding the networks and communities where you can, find these great minds to, like learn and challenge each other. And that's a really great point because a whole purpose of why we built this app, Symposium, is to bring people together. And you like college student clubs are part of that enablers. But sometimes you can, I don't know, like for specific topics like this one, we are trying to kind of tackle where someone just put up any topic and they can just engage in conversations just like four of us, right? And one thing I forgot to mention at the beginning of the podcast is the Bruin Review. You guys are from the Bruin Review, and when I read about your mission, and it's just like exactly similar to what we are trying to do. So I wanted to ask you if you could explain what Bruin Review does and how does that help you guys to have the best out of college experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take it away. So I think one thing that became abundantly clear to me and many other people who were part of the initial Bruin Review as to when it launched, which was 2019 Jan, I want to say, is that there is an there's an increasing gap between people who don't think alike on campus and anywhere else. You'd think that in a place with some of the most brilliant people there is, you would foster such great conversations, great discussions, great debates between people. But actually, the contrary is true. People tend to circle around different beliefs they hold and stick to people within the same group, leaving them very unexposed to people elsewhere with other kinds of views. And there's this increasing gap between people as such that causes huge alienation in my eyes, where people often don't relate, don't identify, and don't associate in some cases with people who don't think like them. And I think that's a tragedy in our modern days context. And it goes against the everything we were talking about. It does not make use of that great community around us because if you're just going to circle yourself with people who think the same, are you really challenging yourself? We kind of all really formulate on the same belief that discourse and disagreement between people it fosters a great way to learn and to keep developing your beliefs, keep being challenged. And that's essentially why the Bruin Review was formed. It served to bridge that gap between people who did not think alike. And I think in such a time, it's extremely prevalent. If you boil down beliefs to conservative or liberal, very simple, straightforward, you'll notice that out of 50 states in America, 44 are dominated by conservatives, but the six that aren't dominate conservatives by an average of over 80 or no, 70%, I think it was, and formulate a great percent of the population. And I think that stat is just crazy because it shows that even on a high level, the country is very divided. People are very divided by their views. And I think it's only through having conversations that really we can foster, great connect and really challenge ourselves. So that's why the Bruin Review was formed. What we do now is essentially, I would like to point out two things. One, we have our publication. So I encourage writers to come in from all kinds of backgrounds, right? We have a very diverse range of people's views. They come in and they write these articles, and we put it in a publication and we hand it out to students of UCLA for free and subscribers. So yeah, we also like to encourage the style called head to head, where we get two people of differing views to write about the same topic and have their views be presented back and forth, who argue on the same premise. We've done that for one example of what we did was socialism versus capitalism. So yeah, I think that's essentially what our publication does. And of course, we have our open discussions where we encourage people to come in. We have a moderator who comes up with different topics, and every day or every time we have an open discussion, we have like an hour long conversation about all range of topics, from very political to just your everyday casual things. Some of the topics we've talked about were um, who will be the president for 2020? Um, is data the new oil of the 21st century? Is Tinder good for your sex life? We've talked about everything, and that's essentially what we do. We're a place where people talk to each other about all kinds of things and are encouraged to disagree and still maintain that true value of connect.
I was hearing the CEO of Minerva School giving an interview, and he mentioned that, like, for if the college education, a cost of college education, increased at the rate of inflation, it would be about 10,000, which is how much they charge. And a lot of the cost goes for expensive buildings and like a lot of researchers that does not may not directly benefit. So like if you look at the current college, do you think it's worth it? Basically, like I don't know how much is it at UCLA. Like, do you think that price tag is worth what you're getting? The whole college experience, or do you think that it should be significantly lower or like very different?
I think again, like the inequality aspect is undeniable, and I feel that the bifurcation between people who are able to afford college and who aren't, and the opportunities that are afforded down the line is definitely, again, that wedge is increasing year by year. But for me, the fact that again, I'm an international student, so I pay like through my nose for college. Like it's really, really bad, and definitely like I feel the pain of paying a huge amount of fee. But again, coming back to the point of what really is the value of college, I feel like the fact that so many people are paying this much for college, and again, the year on year, people take more and more loans. More and more people attend universities. Once again, brings that point of it be having an intrinsic value and a purpose. And for me, that college experience, definitely, I would appreciate if it was cheaper. Why wouldn't I? But I find a great deal of I find a great value in that education and that experience, regardless of the theoretical or the practical knowledge. Just the university experience as a package brings a lot of skills and learnings for me that are irreplaceable, whether that be online, whether that be an online university, whether that even be a local university for me in India. The experience of going to university, figuring out what I want to do. Again, coming back to the point that you mentioned a few years back, the millennials would just go to university to get a job and get out of there. For me, the college experience and the purpose of college, I feel has I've seen a paradigm shift in that. My parents for sure want me to, graduate from college and get a degree and get a job. They spend like $250,000 for one piece of paper. But again, I find that the university is a great place to find not only a way to get into the industry they're interested in, but also find the industry that you're interested in the first place and explore that industry in a nutshell, not as deeply as you would if you would nosedive into the university firsthand. So I find that that experience and that an insight into your interest very valuable and irreplaceable for me.
I have to ask this question. We hear a lot about, the future of work. The jobs are changing, right? And probably you guys would agree that university and colleges are a lot slower to adapt to that. If you think about UCLA in particular, right? Like how would the future of UCLA experience could look like? And, what are the things that you think should change to provide the best college experience to help future students achieve their purpose and expectation from a college education?
I'll take this one. I think I think for a large part, especially UCLA centered, because this is where I have studied, I find that a lot of the real world applications of what you're studying, you only find once you're deep into the university experience. Like, for example, like I'm an econ major and I'm still taking econ lower div courses, and we're studying markets where it's just we would never use those skills in the real world. Now once I get into my major and I start taking the upper div courses and I start taking the value investing courses, the real estate courses, that's where I'll really learn what the theory I've learned at lower divs is applicable in the real world in. So I find that that aspect of the university experience, if the universities were to move the real world application processes a lot sooner, I feel like that would be advantageous to the students as well as the universities. And I think that's becoming even more prevalent now, especially with the whole coronavirus thing hitting. The transition into online education, I think, is going to be a huge factor into that, in that universities can start moving this theoretical knowledge that students get, and students can really start taking those courses on their own time and gaining that real world knowledge in tandem with the theoretical knowledge that they're gaining. And I think that's a huge valuable experience that a student can get from the university experience, which I feel is lost until like a lot later on into the experience, at least for me. I also think that like the going back to the purpose of college itself, the fact that there has been a shift from just you have to go to university and get a degree so that you can get a job, to now a scenario where we are looking at you go to university to find what you like to do, to find what it's all about, to explore your interests, and then potentially go into an industry. And if you don't like what you're interested in, you can switch. That aspect, especially if the universities were to bring that real world experience much sooner, it would cost a lot less for the students to switch, and it would be a lot more helpful in the formative years as well. In if I'm not interested in value investing, I can switch and completely take a different route and see the real world application in physics, for example. And that really goes back to the purpose of university for me, which is to find that balance between what I'm interested in and what I'm good at, to really succeed in life, whatever that definition of success might be. I feel like if we were to learn if the university was to bring the simulation of the real world into into the college experience much sooner, that would give us a better understanding and idea of what the real thing is about.
So the way I see it is, there is a lot of uncertainty after high school. I mean, if you don't go to college, the chances of you succeeding in life are drastically lower if you don't go to college. So the way I see it is, college is nothing but like an insurance, and you are paying a price for that insurance. Once you pay that $60,000 a year fee for 4 years, then there is a higher probability that you will be successful in life. So it is in a way like a sort of insurance that you will be successful in life. That's the way I see it, really. So your question was, is the cost model justified? Like the um
Maybe I didn't word the question clearly, but to give you a little bit of background, when I went to USC, my family had to sell the house that, I mean, the little apartment that all of us grew up, right? And that just covered the first year, and then I studied finance because my main motivation, coming to this country is, first priority was, financial security, and I already have a family at that time. And then the financial crisis hit, and I graduated with the finance degree in 2009. So like when I look back, and I just thought, like, of all that high cost we paid, is that really worth it? Well, I was lucky to get through with recover and, essentially able to find a job. But, I think it is possible for universities to admit 10 times more students. And I think there's a lot about a branding, exclusiveness, versus making that education experience available for, a greater number of people. And if that is the case, if there are more colleges that are able to accept more people, Harvard, all the Ivy League schools, and that would probably, make that degree a less exclusive. Right now, it's a piece of paper, like, and I was just thinking, like which one, like if the colleges were able to do that, if UCLA, for example, can take 10 times more students at a much lower cost, would that affect, or do you guys think that the university should do that?
So, something I wanted to point out is that the problem of cost isn't standardized across um, all universities. I think it's definitely, to an extent, it's far less of an issue at for schools, say, who are, I mean, if you top 50 schools for top 100 schools, for example. And I just looked it up. The median mid-career salary for the for UCLA students is well into six figures and is more than double that of the national median salary. And I think when you have that difference, you may think, hey, college is to an extent, or the student loans, student debt, isn't exactly as much of a burden as it may be for others. And I think that's a very crucial point. It's that there's this huge mid-tier chunk of students who attend universities who aren't necessarily um, accepted into schools that have sub 15% acceptance rates or sub 20% acceptance rates, who do attend university and then find that that it has an effect on their career. Of course, it's not a necessity. I'm not trying to say that university limits your career potential, but if you do consider a general trend, you'll see a deviation. And if that deviation with the same amount of cost is causing crippling student debt, that's an issue. That's an issue for you, and that's an issue for the position you're in. As for students bringing in, or universities bringing in more students, I think that's an interesting point actually, because there has been a lot of pressure across universities, on universities everywhere, to admit more students. I think UCLA is a prime example of that. The government had put pressure on the school to take more students, and well, doubles became triples, and there were a lot more students than there were before, and it's now the most dense college in out of all the UCs in California. I think building off that, there has been increasing amount of pressure for people to take more, especially as acceptance rates spiral low, in that they keep getting lower and lower and lower. I think acceptance rates for many colleges now is less than 5%, 4%, and it's just absolutely unreal, which shows how few people actually get accepted into these colleges that they want to go to. One prime example of that is the traditional Ivy League colleges, whose almost, I want to say, their primary selling point is their prestige. And in order to keep that prestige, it's very important to be elitist about the people you take in. Otherwise, if you're just taking everyone in, then that elitist feature is gone. I mean, there's a reason they make only 500 or so Ferraris. I mean, I might be wrong with the number, but it's meant to be exclusionary. It's meant to be elitist. And I think that's what gives it the prestige. And without the prestige, a lot of universities may crumble, especially seeing as to how expensive they are. And I think that plays a very big part in the push back against taking more students, admitting more students, especially in various private universities. However, I do see some sort of a glimmer of positivity in that, in this topic, as for example, USC, the school you had gone to. I think they announced that if the the income of the people who are attending, or the family's income, household income, is less than $40,000 or $50,000, they will make college absolutely free for those students. And I think that's a great initiative, and many colleges are following suit. And the
Yep.
traditional prestige that a lot of colleges hold are now falling apart. The rankings of various Ivy Leagues, for example, has been plummeting over the years, on average, I should say. And I think prestige is no longer something colleges can simply write off into charging $250,000 for each student they accept. And I think that concept is now becoming old and dried out. And I personally think in 25 years that will almost dry up completely. Or when I say completely, I mean that there will be universities like Harvard who can simply no longer rely on being Harvard in order to take in more students. They'll have to start finding ways to actually compete with other universities and figure out different ways to specialize and change their course of curriculum to make them justify why they deserve their certain status, deserve the status they hold. I think this is evident nowhere better than with grad schools, MBAs, right? There has been a plummeting fall in acceptance rates, or in application rates to various MBA schools, especially, funnily enough, the top universities, right? Which has forced many schools to start offering online MBAs, and a lot of your traditional prestige schools, such as the Ivy Leagues, have been very reluctant to do so. It's only until recently, like the last 2, 3 years, I believe, that a lot of these age-old, historic, prestigious universities have actually started to, you know, give in and start competing, start making things online. And I think that's a very, very valuable transition for the, if you look at it as a market, for the consumers who are the regular people of America, um, or anyone else who attends university for that matter of fact, who will now face the benefit of a lot of things being cheaper, or a lot of aspects of education becoming better, which does make, to an extent, the cost more justified. So let's see what the future holds.
I wanted to ask you guys on this topic. Are there any questions that you wanted to ask? Like mostly I've been asking questions, but are there any questions or areas that you guys would like to discuss?
So I think something that we didn't necessarily touch upon was the opportunity to specialize. I think it just so happens that the people here seem to have this idea of professional development or your career being the next step after your 4 years of undergrad. But for many people, that's not necessarily true. Um, a lot of people enjoy the subject itself and in hopes of someday specializing in it, and that's what a lot of grad school is for. For example, no better example of that is with your pre-med students, right? Who essentially walk into their 4 years of undergrad with the purpose of pursuing another 4 years of education after undergrad, um, for who the specialization is important. Thus, the lower divisions, the theoretical concepts that we may say be taken granted for, are actually very crucial to these people. And these classes, while we may write off as nothing but preparation for the things we use, are actually the foundations of what makes or breaks their 8 years of schooling henceforth. And I think to an extent, I do sympathize with the universities in that it's very difficult to draw that balance between preparing you for the real world, so to speak, around college, and preparing for a genuine education in the field that you chose to study in, for whatever purpose it may be, to pursue it long term or just for the enrichment of the student. And because of the fact that there is no standard, in that not everyone walks in with the same purpose, not everyone walks in with the same ideology and objective, it's very difficult for a university to, make a standardized approach for everyone. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why universities are slow to change. Some things that are interesting to point in University of Washington, for example, there are within the area of computer science, right? There are so many different versions you have. There's computer science, computer engineering, informatics, digital humanities. I don't know. There's just a whole range of things, and different majors often have different specifics and focuses. Some tend to be a lot more career oriented, where they just teach you enough about how to, say, code to land your job and to work as a full time developer. And some of the majors focus a lot more on enriching the theoretical concepts of the, code and technology, that may say prepare you to specialize or just give you a very strong understanding of the underlying grasps. And I think that's a good approach where you have different streams available based on how students prefer. For example, math. In almost every college, there's some form of theoretical math and there's some form of applied math that stand as two different majors that I've seen. And I think that's a very useful distinction because it paves the way for specializing in research or people who just wish to take their 4 years of undergrad and walk away. And I think that's going in my eyes. I also see more of that coming into various fields, into various industries, into various majors. For example, we may see applied economics or theoretical economics as two different majors in, say, 15 years down the line. And that distinction will allow for differences, or allow for a natural separation of students into their purpose behind getting that education. And just other things that I think are very interesting to hear about. I'd love to hear what other students have to say. I do understand that different universities foster different environments. For example, UCLA tends to be very social. So people, as the things we've been talking about, the network is very prevalent here, and it gives us a lot of value. But for a lot of the universities, that's not necessarily true. They tend to be a lot less social than us, for example. Tend to be a lot more theoretical. We run on the quarter system. Each quarter is 10 weeks. There is no way these 10 weeks of material is going to have a genuine effect in laying certain foundations for you. That's another big difference. And of course, the culture of the university itself, University of Washington, something I brought up earlier, students often spend 2 years trying to get into the major they want, which has usually a 20-30% acceptance rate. So their experience would be a lot more different. So I guess it would just be nice to, ask you. I believe you also went to Columbia, was it, for graduate degree?
Yeah.
And anyone else listening who, it would just be interesting to have a conversation about with other students in other universities and their experiences and how that shaped their thought process. I think all of us being at UCLA are more or less in one stream. And I'd love to hear a lot more about others.
Absolutely, and it will be great. We're gonna post this on YouTube and our Instagram, all by Symposium app, SIMPOZ. I'll probably write it, and then will be great to hear different perspective. And yes, you're right. I went to Colombia for my graduate studies, but it's a lot different experience than undergrad. And I was there for 2 years. I already had a family. When I hear you guys talk about the purpose of college degree, and I graduated more than 10 years ago from USC, and now looking back, like having worked more than 10 years, it's just like when I look at my colleagues or managers or leaders that I aspire to, I don't think I ever thought about, wow, this guy knows about subject XYZ. He memorized everything, like I never had that thought. And it was more about the maturity, empathy, the leadership skills, and how they, like the personal like characteristics that somehow embedded in them, that I think is has a big factor in how well we do at our job. And it's just like university is about learning to learn, and it's how do you teach someone to have intellectual curiosity? How do you teach someone to be disciplined and rigorous to do what they're supposed to do without being told, etc. So like I think there's a lot of these qualities that usually embedded in our personalities as a habit over time that I think university plays a big role, in that environment, that we have to do homeworks, we have to do assignments, and we have to work in teams. A lot of those things that really help. In addition to, of course, like from like knowing what I supposed to know. And I at USC, I think I studied in finance, so it's something that is a lot more tangible. You have to learn it, otherwise, it's not like you have to know how to value companies, or have to do a cash flow model, etc. So it's a pretty tangible skills. May not be as tangible for some majors. It may not be that case, but for me, like when I look back, I think it's very difficult to say, but I would take away with more of this intangible, like more of this personal characteristics that we capture, learning to learn, and how we approach work, how we approach working with other people. Like more of that aspect is probably the biggest thing. And going back to meeting like-minded people, discovering about ourselves, challenging ourselves, putting ourselves. We learn a lot about ourselves. And like I did 4 years of consulting, and after working 4 years at McKinsey, like I think I learned a lot about myself, what I'm good at, what I'm not good at. So I think that one is still like the education process goes on, and I think those are the learnings. I think it's just like so much valuable. Though we don't really, university like doesn't really say we teach you how to have more empathy, like have to disagree with someone, which we will constantly have at work, etc. So I think those are the biggest learnings. And now that I kind of look back.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
For sure,
And
for sure.
have you, I just wanted to ask, just to understand a little more about your case. Have you, I guess, had interactions with people who, say, graduated from USC, or who've somewhat come from a similar background as you, followed a similar stream, but at a much later time? Have you been gifted the chance of, interacting with people as such?
Sorry, come again?
And if so, I just wanted to understand if you've been able to interact with people who've came through a similar path as you, who've had that time difference as you, who've had that time difference between when you graduated and when they graduated, or when you went to school and when they went to school. And if so, how have you noticed, or what have you noticed to be the biggest change over this time?
I work a lot. Like I worked a lot with, business analyst, which is probably there's like 10 years gap between me and them. And honestly, I haven't noticed that much of a difference. Like what I learned, I think it's more of a personal factors. I run into people who are just like very, very talented, even at a very young age. And I wouldn't say it's because, they are the Gen Z. It's just they are different, so I'm pretty sure there are a lot of differences we can find. Like when I talk to USC students now, like they have so many things that I didn't have. One example will be like I think there is like a Trojan, like a VC fund that they actually do the work of a VC fund. They would evaluate startup companies and invest real money into them. So a lot of that, like getting the real practical experience embedded in like a 3-unit class that they didn't have. And I'm pretty sure if I had that experience, it would benefited me a lot. And a lot of they also even had like they had classes where they can start up a company. So like when I was at USC, none of that existed. And 10 years down the road, those guys, become a founders, entrepreneurs, and that they learn the skills they learn there probably benefit a lot.
For sure.
That's interesting.
It's very
Yeah, I've heard
interesting.
random things about USC. Really cool classes they have. I think one of my friend told me about a sailing class that they have where they essentially teach you to sail for 1 unit. And yeah, just crazy the kinds of classes USC has. It's very interesting to hear about.
Yeah, awesome. Are there any topics that you guys would like to propose that might be interesting for this podcast?
So do you mean specific to similarities or some similar lines of purpose of college or something
No,
completely different?
actually, just in general, like a topic for our next podcast doesn't have to do with education. Praveen, you mentioned about picking a topic that there's a very polarizing view, and it's good to have like a very healthy disagreement, bringing like diverse perspective. Just if you have any topics to suggest, we will probably make episode every week. So just wanted to see if you guys have any suggestions, topics that if you were to listen to this podcast, right, what would you be interested?
Do you guys have any suggestions?
Nothing comes to mind right now, but is there a way to contact you? I mean, I
Yeah,
could definitely send a few topics your way later.
absolutely, absolutely. Keep in mind.
So some things that come to my mind, like we had an open discussion for the Brood Review, as I mentioned, yesterday, in fact, and one of our topics I think is very interesting. It's what the value of social currency and how that's affected corporate strategies and business models. Talking about things like Supreme, which rely on people using it or people wearing their products for various um, exploitations of social media, and you have Apple who quite simply holds such a strong brand value that won't go away, and things like that. So just focusing on the social currency and the social valuation of certain product. I think that's very interesting if you're going into it. I think politically, something that's also topical would be interesting to discuss about would be what the U.S. government's ideal response to the coronavirus would look like. That's something that's topical and very interesting. I guess you could also go into something that's more philosophical that a lot of people may relate to more without understanding a lot more of the technicalities of it. Would just be something like um, what it means to be happy and what is a way to be happy, something as such. Or you could go down the road of talking about something else in the U.S. such as inequality, for example, income inequality, or something like that. There, again, as Talib said, I can we usually at the Bruno
Yeah.
we have like a list of our topics that we've talked about before, and I'd be happy to send them across.
These are great. I would love to see these conversations on Symposium, and definitely on a podcast episode as well. Awesome. I want to thank you guys for your time, and also sharing very interesting perspectives on the topic. And stay safe. Wish you guys all the best, and hopefully we get over this situation, coronavirus situation, and get back to normal. So thank you very much, guys.
Thank
Yeah,
you, Mon.
thank you for having us.
having me.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having
All right,
us. Take care.
Awesome. Have a good weekend, guys.
You too. Bye bye.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.